Good morning again. Welcome all to our Sunday morning Sunday school. Age of the patriarchs, time of the great Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Judah, and all them folks. We are in Genesis chapter 50 time frame. We are winding down. And we are now in the lifetimes of Joseph and getting ready for the events of Job. But we're not there quite yet. We are past the death of Jacob, not quite to the death of Joseph. So in those ending sections of Genesis 50. So as a quick refresh, keeping us on track, let's pick up in Genesis 50, verse 18. Genesis 50:18. His brothers also came, fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to keep many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So this is a period where there is peace and comfort and life and growth. And this present result that Joseph is speaking of is God's provision for his people, while the world around them is a bit chaotic right now, as we're seeing. So as mentioned, while the Bible is, of course, our foundation and authority, we're getting some background info from Egyptologist David Roll here. I thought about this. To truly understand the Bible, we need to understand the people in the Bible. To truly understand the people in the Bible, we need to understand their world. When we know their world, then we know the people. Then we know their Bible experience, and then we know the biblical place for our own experience. Now, as you know, my whole burden and drive is to take you there. So, mentioned before that during this unique time, in Egypt's 13th dynasty, the pharaohs are weak, but we're no longer in the Middle Kingdom. We're in that second intermediate period where the pharaohs are weak, but who's strong? The number twos, the viziers. Joseph and his sons are the ones actually of higher power and influence than the pharaohs themselves. In fact, they're actually choosing pharaohs and dismissing pharaohs during this amazing time here. And this is from the Egyptian records of these people. And so very unique time. In fact, we see that while Joseph was known as who's called the one who lives, Ane or Anku, his sons Manasseh was known as Resheneb. That was his Egyptian name. And Ephraim's Egyptian name was Imeri. And so we have in the Egyptian records of these guys that Manasseh, Resheneb in Egyptian, was the chief scribe of Anku, Paanea, Joseph, while Joseph was the vizier. And we've got a record of that. So kind of interesting to see the power play and the dynamics here that are going on. So what's happening here? So let's do our usual kickoff to class by going through and seeing who we've got here. 1608 BC, Middle Bronze Age 2A, over in China. 133. Over in China, we have Emperor Woding of the Shang Dynasty, ruling over here from Yanxi, also known as Bo. In this land of Egypt, in our 13th dynasty, we have Pharaoh Amenemhat the Fifth, number 5, during that second intermediate period. And again, remember, like was just mentioned, this is a unique time confirmed by secular records where the viziers, Joseph and his sons, are more powerful than the pharaohs. They are choosing pharaohs and dismissing pharaohs. So very unique time while we're no longer in the high point of the Middle Kingdom. We're now in that second intermediate period between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom that will come later. Sister Ashley.
I'm sorry, I just walked in, but you said they're choosing the pharaohs? So that
Yep.
means they're not doing a line of succession? by royal blood or anything like that?
No, in fact, the royal blood kind of died out with the 12th dynasty. And that's part of the issue here. After the high point of Joseph's Pharaoh Amenemhat III, his son Amenemhat IV died before the father did. And then so he brought in his daughter to be Pharaoh with him. And then he died, and she ruled as Pharaoh alone, Neferu Sobek. But then she died and didn't have an heir either. And that was the end of the 12th dynasty, leading into the 13th dynasty that we're seeing here. Now, there are some who say these early pharaohs were still part of that 12th dynasty, and this later guy, Sobek-Hotep I, became the real true first pharaoh of the 13th dynasty. But either way, we're still in that intermediate period. We're out of the Middle Kingdom. It's at a lower point for Egypt now. And so it's a little more of a disarray, not a high point with great, powerful pharaohs. We won't really see that again until the New Kingdom. In the New Kingdom, we have guys like Ramses and all of that. So we'll get, but yeah, so that's what's happening right now. Joseph and later his sons after him are ones picking and choosing pharaohs. And again, dismissing pharaohs. It's not just, okay, you're in for life like it normally is. And again, this is in the secular records of what was happening during this very unique time. So here's the pharaoh of the moment, Amenemhat V. During this time, again, we're after the death of Jacob, before the death of Joseph, the end of Genesis chapter 50. Brother Clay.
Since he's got the most power, what was the importance of having a pharaoh?
Dare we say tradition? It was the tradition, the social structure, and the goal was to eventually have a strong pharaoh. But this was a unique opportunity, but let's not forget God's hand behind the scenes here too. God is using this opportunity to grow his people. And remember, the people of God, the Semites, the Hebrews, the Syrians coming from that area, Asiatics, they start to become a threat to Egypt because of their power and influence. And the natives start to react to the presence of these Semites. And there become more powerful pharaohs later on who say, wait a minute, we need to take back Egypt from these overpopulating Semites and their influence. So kind of interesting to see. Remember too, one of the things we see happening here that often happens in life, two groups occupying the same space, they get together and have babies. Remember Joseph's own wife was Egyptian. Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the high priest of Heliopolis. So Ephraim and Manasseh, who become leaders of the tribes of Israel, they are half-breeds. They're half Egyptian and half Jewish, half Hebrew, half Israelite. And so we see that too later on with rulers of Egypt, even pharaohs, with all this intermixing of society. There are pharaohs who have Semite blood in them, as we see. So this becomes an issue later on in this interaction of cultures that started as a blessing. It was the Semites, the Hebrews, the Asiatics who saved Egypt, through Joseph, and they've been a blessing. But now they start to feel threatened rather than embracing and partaking in the blessing. Remember, God told Abraham, "Whoever blesses you blesses me. Whoever curses you, I will curse, and whoever blesses you, I will bless." And those kind of things. So there's an interesting dynamic at play as events are rolling out here with Egypt and the Lord's people there. So did that kind of help with that? Yeah, right. So meanwhile, in other Bible lands, over in Assyria, we have King Naram-Sin of their old kingdom. There he is being presented to the god Ashur. And in Isin, we have King Iter-Pisha coming back over to the Bible land way. So Ashur is a little further north. Isin's kind of here in the middle of Mesopotamia. Hey, brother, go. And then over in further south, Larsa, we have right here, Warad-Sin. Remember, Sin is the moon god of Mesopotamia. So when you see that in their names, they're bringing the moon god into their names and their leadership and society. That's all stuff from Warad-Sin. down in Larsa. Back further north in Mesopotamia, over in the New Kingdom of Babylon, their early days, we've got a king named Sabeum. So Isin and Larsa are towards the south, down there. Babylon is right over there. And Tower of Babel and Eridu is right there. And lastly, that brings us to Byblos on the coast. There in what the Bible calls Phoenicia, what we know as Lebanon. And over in Byblos, our current king of that city-state is a guy named Ibshi-Muwabi. So there's Lebanon, here's Byblos right next to Beirut. So that is there. So those are the players at this moment in 1608 BC. So at this time, Judah is now 96 years old. Joseph is now 93 years old. These are the last 17 years of Joseph's life that we are down to now. Judah's son Perez, about 66. Perez's son Hezron, about 53. And those three are in the line of Christ. So what we are doing right now, as mentioned in my intro, about to understand the Bible, we have to understand the people. To understand the people, we have to understand their world. And when we understand that, and then we understand the people and the Bible, then we understand our world and our place as people. These are people in the Bible. We want to be people of the Bible. And so we take and understand their world and their experience within the Bible context. Then we can relate and understand our own experience and bring it under that. So what we're doing as we're in these next 17 years leading up to Joseph's death at the end of chapter 50 of Genesis is we're taking a nice casual stroll through the changing world around them. So don't worry about remembering names and dates or anything like that, keeping track, just kind of enjoy the ride, enjoy the tour, ask questions along the way, but kind of take it in that this is what's going on in their world, what's happening around them as God behind the scenes is preparing things and shifting things for how things are going to play out. The world at the time of Joseph's death is a bit different from the time of Jacob's death, not very long before, about 53 years between the two. The time from Joseph's death to Moses's birth, the world has another shift as we're seeing and getting ready for this during the time of Job. So continuing our tour after this point, here we are, 1608 BC. We already have a new Pharaoh in Egypt. And this guy is named 1, 4, 8, Sehetepibre. No, it wasn't. Yeah. So this seal, we don't know where it came from. It's unknown provenance we know where it came from. This was bought by a private collector in Cairo. It was sold in 1926 to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's still there now. The seal has Sehetepibre's first name is prenomen, and it's dedicated to Hathor, the Lady of Byblos. So there's a relation between Egypt and Byblos here, and they're interacting and trading and whatnot. Hathor is the cow goddess of Egypt. So the sacred cow, yes. And so it's further inscribed here in the cuneiform with the name of a governor of Byblos named Yakin-El, who will come up later. So here's what's interesting. So what happened with Amenemhat IV? Excuse me, what happened with the last guy, Amenemhat V? Well, when he was crowned Pharaoh, he was in his early 20s. But his reign was cut short. Why? After just 3 years on the throne, the young king was overthrown by the very officials who had promoted his candidacy for those twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. We mentioned how the one crown kind of looks like a cone head. And there's the white crown and the red crown, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. When you're leading the unified kingdom, you wear both crowns and they fit together. So he was overthrown, and the royal diadem passed into the hands of a bunch of kings who were ephemeral. They were passing, they didn't last. And some of their names were not very royal names. There's one, Iufni, which means he is mine. Ren-Seneb, which means healthy name. He's very fascinating. We'll get to him in a moment and who he might possibly be. Someone from the Bible. Kenjer, which means go to the end, and Murmashal, which means troop commander. And as mentioned earlier, a lot of these pharaohs actually were from the Lord's people. They were Hebrew, they were Asiatic, they were Semite, had that in their bloodline, in that mix. So what's going on here? Those are the ruling class, because it's not just Joseph as vizier, there's also the courts and the priests and all these different, power players here. So while there's debate over the succession and some back and forth and intrigue there, all the while behind the scenes, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph are quietly prospering in the wide, flat farming lands of Goshen. Remember, the best of the land. Many families had migrated south to exploit that rich soil of that Nile Valley. Israelites are multiplying and spreading throughout the land. The Nile has returned to its regular cycle. The great famine's at its end. So now we're at that shift in point here. We're in time as we see things develop. Also, about around this time, 1608 BC, we have the birth of Telah, 5th generation down from Joseph. Telah is born to Resheph, so dad's about 20 years old here. And this birth is in the line of Joseph down to Joshua. So with the number of generations they have, and from the time of Joseph to the time of Joshua, looks like they became fathers and fathered the next generation every 20 years or so on average. So that's a ballpark there. Sister Ash.
Just a trivial thing. Do you know how much the museum paid that guy for that?
No, I don't. It'd be interesting to know.
Is it you said it's a seal?
It's a cylinder seal. So it's
What they
circular,
roll.
what you'd roll out in clay
Yeah.
and make an imprint. And it's made out of lapis lazuli,
Yeah.
which is very rare.
Because that's the
Originally only found in the minerals only found in Afghanistan, but then it started to pop up in other places. But yeah.
I wonder.
Yeah. See that on eBay. So as we're rolling down, taking our journey, 1607 BC, we've got a new king of Isin, Urdukuga. But Isin, we see, is really shrinking in power. Again, we're seeing a shift in the dynamics here. Isin is shrinking in power. He credited the god Dagon, god from the middle of the Euphrates, possibly brought into the area by their founder, Ispiara. Anyway, and he does all these things commemorating this guy. The well-founded residence. Inscriptions describe this king and his relationship with the gods. He's the shepherd who brings everything for Nippur. Remember, Nippur is their Mount Olympus for all their different Mesopotamian gods. The supreme farmer of the gods On and Enlil, provider of the Ikur, and not taking all sorts of care for Nippur's sanctuaries. The Ikur for Enlil, Esumisa for Ninurta, Igama for Gula, Ninurta's divine wife. There's a cone shaft that talks about a temple being built for Lulul, to do a digging of a canal first. And so all these different things they're doing, the names of all these other gods. Remember, these are descendants of Noah. These are all people dispersed from the Tower of Babel, going to the different areas and formulating their different cultures and societies. And it's sad to see the quick departure from the one true God to all these other groups of gods, pantheism, all these false gods. So that one that was mentioned earlier in Egypt, Iufni, is now Pharaoh in Egypt in 1605 BC. In fact, he rules from a different capital, not the famous Ichitawi. He is actually ruling back from Memphis, which is over kind of down in the middle here. So you've got Giza up here where all the famous pyramids are, and other stuff down to the south. There's Memphis right here, where he's ruling from. Memphis had been a capital back in the Old Kingdom days, and so he makes it their capital again for now. Another name for Jewefni is interesting, Jewefni. So we possibly see that Israelite Hebrew connection as well. Next up, now we get 1605 BC, Yakin-El over in Byblos. His name means El raises up, or God raises up. Now it gets really interesting. I had some fun with this over the weekend, getting ready for this class. Because the Bible tells us that Moses' dad, Amram, married his aunt, Jochebed, daughter of Levi. Well, and we know how long Levi lived, we know how long Amram lived, and we know, of course, how long Moses lived. We know how long Amram's dad Kohath lived. We know how long Kohath's dad Levi lived. We've got death ages for all these folks. We don't have all the years of their birth or how old their father was when they were born. So looking at this, looking at the timeline, okay, so what I actually did to show you the nerd that I am, on Excel, I took, okay, here's the age length of this one. Here's the age length of that one. We don't know the start date, but we know how. So how could this work because we know that Kohath was born before they went to Egypt. He was with them when they went to Egypt. Amram was born sometime later. Of course, Moses born sometime later. But knowing when these guys died, how could it work for Moses's mom to be born from Levi, who is with those who came into Egypt at the start, and then Moses is born and they leave? So how did that all work? And could Amram have really married his aunt Jochebed? Is that because there's some questions and challenges to this? So here's what I saw. Again, my philosophy is Occam's razor. What's the simplest solution without having to throw a whole bunch of things in the mix to make it work? You shouldn't have to force it. Square peg, round hole, all that stuff. All that to say, what looks plausible and reasonable is that about this time, 1605 BC, Moses's mom, Jochebed, is born to Levi, the time that he's about 100 years old. Remember, Jacob was in his 90s when he fathered his sons. And so Joseph was still alive for the birth of Moses's mom. So we kind of think these things far off. There's only about 64 years between the birth of Moses and the death of Joseph beforehand. So yeah, so it looks plausible. And we'll see as we go on from here how it times out with Amram and Jochebed and the births of the kids and all that and their ages and how workable that is. So stay tuned for that. Moral of the story, bottom line is, the Bible may say some unexpected things, but it does work without having to do stupid things to force it to get it to work. So moving right along, new king in Babylon, 1603 BC, named Apil-Sin. Again, he was with those Amorites, those northern westerners who came in. He is the grandfather of Hammurabi, very famous Babylonian we'll get to later. We don't know much else about this guy. Babylon's still in its early sketchy days. There's not even really calling themselves kings of Babylon yet because Babylon ain't much just yet. Also in 1603, we have a new king in Isin named Sin-magir. So, or however that's pronounced, probably not pronounced like that. Suen-magir is another way of looking at it. Let's see, this guy here, 149. New king in Isin. What do we got from this guy? Okay, that's the Sumerian king list that came out of Larsa, which is one of the cities that Isin was battling with. And so this is one of the earliest records we have listing the different kings from the different areas. But this guy, Sin-magir, again, constructing storehouses for the goddesses. Aktu Pitum, he commissioned this. It was commissioned by Nuptuptum, the priestess or concubine, his beloved traveling escort, mother of his firstborn. So, hey, I'm going to take this traveling priestess concubine, who's the mom of my firstborn, and in her name, I'm going to dedicate this to the goddess. Yeah, that's what was going on in the world. Okay, now, for those who are saying, yeah, this is all fine and dandy, Eric, but we want to get some scripture. Okay, get ready for some scripture. Because about this time, 1603 BC, we have a new generation being born with the Lord's people, especially in the line of Jesus. So here we go. We have about 1603 BC, Ram is born to Hezron. Hezron's about 58 years old, ballpark here. Ram is the 26th generation of Adam. So if Adam's generation 1, Ram is generation 26. Going backwards from Jesus back, he's 38th generation away from Jesus through Joseph. So let's see what the Bible tells us about Ram and his generation, and who these folks are. And again, I'm doing this in pieces because I want to do us the favor and not read 1 Chronicles 1 through 9 straight through. So Matthew chapter 1. Feel free to turn to these with me. Feel free to just listen along, or feel free to jot them down for later reference. But here are all the places that talk about this generation, including Ram. Matthew 1, verse 3. Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar, Remember that story. Perez fathered Hezron, and Hezron fathered Ram. So there we are there. Then we go to First Chronicles. First Chronicles chapter 1. Again, we'll see not only Ram, but some of his generations and events. Something's happening over in the land of Edom. Verse 46 of First Chronicles 1. When Husham died, Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the field of Moab, became king in his place. Name of his city was Avith. So that's going on over in the line of Esau at this time, the different generations coming down. Chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Let's see. Son of Ethan was Azariah. Now sons of Hezron were born to him were Jeremiel, Ram, and Chelubai. Okay. We go to chapter 4 of First Chronicles, verses 3 and 4. These were the sons of Etam, Jezreel, Ishma, and Idbash. The name of their sister was Hazelelponi. I try to say that without chuckling. Yes. Penuel was the father of Gedor, and Ezer was the father of Hushah. These were the sons of Hur, firstborn of Ephrathah, the father of Bethlehem. So the city of Bethlehem, where David would come from, was founded by this line of people here, in this line of Judah here, and the different branches branching off here. So we get an early backstory to them. Go down to verse 21 to 23 of First Chronicles 4. Remember this guy, the sons of Shelah, the son of Judah, were the father of Leka, and Leda, the father of Marashah, the families of the house of the linen workers at Beth Ashbea, and Jocham, the men of Kozeba, Joash, Seraph, who ruled in Moab, and Jashubi Lahem. And the records are ancient. Yeah, tell me. These were the potters, the inhabitants of Netam and Gedera. They lived there with the king for his work. We don't have a king yet. The writer of Chronicles is pulling back this history and revealing this history, bringing back to the forefront this history for the people who are in Babylon, who are going to be coming back home and rebuilding the temple. So he's saying where these people came from. And at the end of the genealogy of chapters 1 through 9, he picks up in the time of David. So what he's doing is he's giving the ancestry of these people from the time of David going backwards. So he starts from the back and brings them up to the time of David and goes forward from there. So what's interesting about verse 21? Shelah, the son of Judah. Who was this guy? Remember, once upon a time, true story, Judah had a son named another son named Onan, and another son named Shelah. Well, was married to this woman named Tamar, and was evil in the sight of the Lord, so God killed Judah told Onan, hey, go marry your brother and raise a son, have a son in your brother's name, and then yours afterwards or yours afterwards. Well, Onan didn't want to do that, so he refused to conceive with her. That didn't make God happy. God killed him. Judah says, well, that was two. I've got Shelah. So hey, Tamar, let's just wait a bit. Let Shelah grow up a little bit. And didn't end up happening. He withheld Shelah from her. So we had the whole episode that happened where Judah thought he was sleeping with someone else, ended up being Tamar in disguise, got her pregnant. Now we have Perez and his twin brother Zerah, Perez in the line of Christ. So this guy Ram is born to Hezron. So we go from Judah to Perez to Hezron to Ram. So Ram is coming from all that. So this guy Shelah, who didn't end up with Tamar, what did end up happening with him? He had family. The sons of Shelah, the son of Judah, were He named his firstborn son after his older brother who died. That's kind of interesting there. And then was the father of Leka and on down through there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We follow up and we hear later on what happened with Shelah after all. So he missed out on Tamar, but he did end up having family. So that is chapter 4. Let's skip over to chapter 7. First Chronicles 7. Again, just taking kind of a slice through all these things and getting this line here. First Chronicles 7, verse 10. In the line of Benjamin. The son of Jediel was Bilhan, and the sons of Bilhan were Jeush, Benjamin, Ehud, Chinahah, Zethan, Tarshish, and Ahishahar. Yeah. Sometimes I think they had weird first names because they didn't have last names. Which Bob are you? Well, I'm Bob Smith. I'm Bob Jones. Oh, okay. Now I know which Bob you are. So I think they had their first names to really make them distinct. That's just my thing. Anyway, so verse 14 from the line of Manasseh. Sons of Manasseh were Azriel, to whom his Aramean concubine, Syrian concubine, gave birth. She also gave birth to Mashir, father of Gilead. So these cities, Gilead is a city in the tribe of Manasseh. The Manasseh tribe kind of splits in half. Half goes on the one side of the Jordan, the other half with the rest of Israel on the other side. And in there is the land of Gilead, where we have the famous balm of Gilead. And we saw in Wednesday night's COVID, Gilead Sciences coming up with remdesivir and all that stuff. Named for that. And so this is where they get their name. That's where that all comes from. Everything comes from somewhere. That was verse 14. Let's go to 31. This brings us to the line of Asher. In the line of Asher, 1 Chronicles 7:31, sons of Beriah were Heber and Machiel, who was the father of Beerzath. Verse 32, Heber fathered Japhlet, Shomer, and Hotham, and their sister Shua. Okay. Now, take a breath. Let's jump over to chapter 23. 1 Chronicles 23. Again, describing the families and the people alive at the time of David and Solomon. We'll pick up in verse 8. Now, these are the different tribes of Levi and their descendants. So Levi's 3 sons, Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. So here with the Gershonites in 1 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 8. The sons of Ladan were Jehiel the first, Zetham, and Joel 3. The sons of Shimeon were Shelamoth, Haziel, and Haran 3. These were the heads of the fathers' households of Ladan. Sons of Shimei were Jahath, Zena, Jeush, and Beriah. These 4 were the sons of Shimei. Jahath was the first, Ziza the second, but Jeush and Beriah did not have many sons. So they became a father's household, one group for duty. That's kind of interesting. Skip down to 18 for the Kohathites. Here we've got the son of Izhar was Shelamith, the chief. Sons of Hebron were Jeriah the first, Amariah the second, Jahaziel the third, Jechemiah the fourth. Sons of Uziel, Micah the first, and Ishiah the second. And then into Merari. Sons of Merari were Mali and Mushi. Sons of Mali were Eliezer and Kish. And we skip down to 23. Sons of Mushi were 3, Mali, Eder, and Jeremoth. Whew. Okay, so that's it for our slice of Chronicles for today. And again, it's better than 9 chapters straight of names. But we do close in Exodus chapter 6. Exodus chapter 6. Verses 21 and 22. Tell us. And the sons of Izhar, Korah, Nepheg, and Sikri, the sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elizaphan, and Sithri. Okay, so these are all the different generations happening around. Of course, not everyone's born the same year, so there's some variation, but all these people are being born. So when the Bible says that the population was growing exceedingly, as we see later on, yeah, we see that. And we've got the names and the records there to prove that. So at the time Ram was born to Hezron, Judah is now 101. Joseph is now 98. We're now down to the last 12 years of Joseph's life. Perez about 71, Hezron again about 58 when he fathers Ram. So, any questions, reactions on all that craziness? Yeah, life is happening, babies are being born, and population is spreading and growing. Meanwhile, things are changing in the world around them. Segub is also born to Judah's grandson Hezron a little later. 1 Chronicles 2:21. Let me get that in here real quick. 1 Chronicles 2:21. 1 Chronicles 2:22. Later, Hezron had relations. God bless you. Later, Hezron had relations with the daughter of Mashir, the father of Gilead, whom he married when he was 60 years old. She bore him Segub. Okay. So that's what's happening in the Bible while all these things are going on in the world. So what we got next? Moving on down to the last few years of Joseph. This brings us to 1602 BC. Yet again, Another pharaoh in Egypt. This time, Sankhibre, who's known as Seankhibre, Ameny, Antef, Amenemhat VI. We're not even sure if he ruled over all of Egypt. We pretty much know that he had the south near Nubia, which have been conquered already by the 12th dynasty before him, and that's going to be held on to Egypt for another 60 years. But we're not really sure that he had much of any control over the north. So again, Egypt is fragmented at this time. It's in that intermediate period, in that dip between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. So it looks like by the 1600s BC, the Shang dynasty is now using oracle bones for divination, for seeing what the gods have for them. Oracle bones are what they would take tortoiseshell, the backs of tortoiseshells, and have things written on them, and use them to divine what the gods were telling them. So, yep, different strokes for different folks. This brings us to yet another pharaoh, 1597 BC. It's now into the 1500s. This new guy, Smenkhare Nebnuni. I am glad there is no test on any of these guys' names. We don't know much about this guy. We've got his stela, which is like a big rock thing that they write on. It shows that during this period, these guys in the 13th dynasty, they still had some power. They were able to get mining expeditions going down in the Sinai Peninsula to bring back construction materials and to get some luxury items. And again, there's no royal connection between a lot of these pharaohs. This guy has no connections that we see. So he may have usurped the throne. So again, things are unstable in Egypt while the Lord's people are growing and prospering. So we covered Moses's mom. Now this brings us to Moses's dad. About 1597 BC, we have the birth of Moses's father, Amram, born to Levi's son, Kohath, who is about 71 now. So we got a few verses that tell us about Moses's dad. So let's check those out. Numbers 26:58 tells us, Leviticus, Numbers 26:58. There's 26:58. These are the families of Levi: the family of the Libnites, the family of the Hebronites, the family of the Malites, the family of the Mushites, and the family of the Korahites. Kohath fathered Amram. That's Moses's dad. So we have that. We also have in 1 Chronicles, chapter 6, verse 2, the sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. Verse 18, the sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. That got repeated. And chapter 23, verse 12, we have the sons of Kohath were 4 in number: Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. So we get that, which brings us back to Exodus chapter 6, verse 18, 6:18. And the sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And the length of Kohath's life was 133 years. And finally, Numbers 3, that's Leviticus, Numbers 3, verse 19. And the sons of Kohath by their families, Amram and Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. So yes, Joseph was still alive when Moses' dad was born, as well as his mom. So Moses' mom is older than Moses' dad. In fact, she is his aunt. She's a daughter of Levi in his old age, where Amram, Moses' dad, is a grandson. So Levi's grandson married Levi's daughter. And which sounds strange to us, but it looks like, is it possible with the ages, again, as I mentioned, you're shifting their lifespans and where things could have fallen into place and still be reasonable? Looks like if with this one possible way it could have played out, there'd only be an age gap between them of about 8 years. And we all know folks who've been married couples who have a lot longer age gap between them than that. So different generations on the lines, but closer in age. So plausible and workable with the information the Bible gives us. So that is a good stopping point for now that we have come to the birth of Moses's parents during the lifetime of Joseph in his last few years here. So I know not as exciting and action-packed as some other things we've looked at, but again, we are taking our time, taking our stroll through these things, seeing the world shift around them as God is behind the scenes, as he is growing and strengthening his own people for this ultimate conflict that's going to happen between the society of Egypt and the Lord's people within them and what the Lord's bringing out through that. So with that, does anyone have any thoughts? Does anyone have any questions or observations on anything that we have looked at for this morning in this time of transition? What you think, Sister Diana? I see that smile there.
I'm again thinking, when is he going to start singing that song? I'm my own grandpa.
There you go. Having an uncle that's younger than you. Yeah. And we will see later on by the big part.
We got 5 minutes. Can you go back?
Oh, yeah, go right ahead. Well, we're not on a set time schedule. There's no official stop time.
Oh, so they, okay, well, how will they know when class?
When you go and tell
They don't look at
them. And so, yeah, so feel free to go ahead and let them know we're winding down.
So my point in bringing that out is that as far as her uncle is concerned, she's older than he is.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about here in the Bible, she's older than he is.
Yeah.
To marry her.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And we see too, as time goes on, remember, and while this is something kind of foreign to us, remember in these earlier days too, before society spread out as far as they do, that marrying closer to your family was less of a problem in many other ways than it is now. And certainly it's less necessary now. There were genetic bottlenecks. Okay, there were only 8 people on the ark. Well, okay, you've got to work with who you've got to work with. Adam and Eve and et cetera, you know, with their kids. And so we see by the time of the Exodus, by the time of the law of Moses, that's when it said, okay, we got 2 million of us now. You can find someone without having to look too close to home. And so that's when some things are enshrined and encoded in the law of Moses from God that, okay, and it's also not only for health and safety, but there's, because keep in mind too, as mentioned before, the more variety in your genes, the more diversity in your genes, the better you are, because that's why there are some medical problems with close family lines intermarrying, because your genes are so similar. You've got the same strengths and weaknesses, where when you marry someone who's more diverse from you, then your children get the benefit of both, and your strengths offset their weaknesses and vice versa. And so we see that benefit as well. And there's also not an important factor, the sin factor and the influence and spread of sin in the degrading of our DNA and our genes and the different diseases and everything that develop from there, and mutations in the genes as well, things that happen. So the curse of sin has its impact and its spread and its impact further as we go as well. So there was less damage before and it's more harmful now. And you see the results of that. That kind of makes sense. So, but it's just what's happened in this world and we see it play out, and the Bible relates it straight up. So appreciate the thoughts on that. Anything else from anyone else? If not, we'll go ahead and call our Sunday school a wrap for this day and pick up getting into those 1500s. We are just now 5 years from the death of Joseph at the end of Genesis 50. So we'll stop our share. Oops, close that. Stop our recording and get ready for